Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Angela Hill, NATRE Director, and I'm here today with Katie Freeman, Chair of NATRE. And we're delighted to welcome you to this Interfaith Week discussion on the importance of RE in fostering interfaith understanding in schools. We're really honoured to be joined by Jonathan Marshall, MBE. He's founder of the Plymouth Centre for Faiths and Cultural Diversity. We've also got with us Amy R. from the Faith and Belief Forum, and Chris Abbas, who is the Baha'i representative from the Interfaith Council for Wales. All our panellists bring valuable experience in interfaith work, and we hope that this discussion will be really useful for teachers and pupils. Over to Katie for the first question for our panellists.
Brilliant. Thank you to each of you for joining us today. It's great to have you with us, and we're looking forward to hearing from you and your expertise. So the first question I've got for you is kind of a bit of a general one, so we can get to know a bit more about you. So what inspired each of you to work in interfaith organisations, and how has your personal journey influenced the work that you do?
Yeah, I think for me, I've always had faith influences from different sources. As a young boy, not unusually, I was totally devoted to being a professional footballer, and that kind of went on till I was about 18 or 19. But there were other influences too, and I was always interested in big questions and what was the meaning of it all, what was my purpose, and so forth. Those were always kind of in the background, really. And then, cut a long story short, when I was in late teens and I had sort of all kinds of challenges over various things, bit of an important time for me, and that really brought those questions forward. Often is the case, is it not? And so those questions became very important. I had one cousin who was a Baptist minister, another cousin who was a Catholic priest, so I used to talk to them. I found myself looking at Christianity, loosely brought up within the sort of Church of England, but I was looking at Hindu, Sufi tradition, Buddhism particularly, and that, cut a long story short, also took me with a group of friends to London. This is, you've got to remember, this is the late flower power of the 1960s, so you've got to sort of make allowances, but we were interested in all those sort of alternative ways of life, and that took us to London, to a place called Gandalf's Garden, which was a wonderful scene for alternative and particularly for spiritual ways of being. And from there, it took me to the Buddhist centre in Scotland, Samiling, which was one of the first centres established in Europe. And that really set me on my course in committing myself to a Buddhist tradition, but not really until 2 years later. I was sort of nominally thinking about Buddhism, but again, drawing from many different sources. And so there's always been that kind of difficulty in accepting that any one religion has the monopoly on truth. And so I've always sensed that that can be found in all sorts of authentic religious traditions. And for me, that took me to India and to the Himalayas and to Tibetan refugees. And so I lived in northern India for a couple of years, and that again with the emphasis on particularly the Dalai Lama's influence, that in becoming a Buddhist you respect all religious traditions, and one who criticizes others of their faith, it's as if you are denigrating your own faith. So there's always then been, I'm cutting a huge story, long story, boring story, probably short here. But that really inspired me. So getting back much later, then training to teach, which maybe I'll come to talk about a bit later. And then finding all those influences were incredibly useful for me, and being able to draw upon those different sources with the commonality of there being a spiritual path, and that how important it is for me and for young people, for everyone, to find that sense of who they really are, what's most important, what is really worth doing. And I think that's what all religious traditions point to. Sometimes it's difficult to get to it amongst the formal beliefs and practices and so forth, but that's what we might call the spiritual dimension, is something I'm very keen to promote through my teaching in those days. And then I was very fortunate in being able to help set up the centre in the late 1990s, 2000. And again, I suppose for me, it was drawing upon all those influences and the power of that, the meaning of that, the persuasiveness of that, that all traditions contain that possibility, and to be able to ensure we can allow children to avail themselves of that, to bring those experiences to the attention of children in the classroom.
It's a fascinating story, and they say, don't they, that you find out something new about people you've known for a long time every day. Today's my day. But also as somebody who uses the centre, as a teacher who uses that centre in Plymouth, it's fascinating to hear that journey. And I think what you've described is really what happens, and how amazing that resource is for the city and the schools within it. So thank you. Yeah. So Chris is unmuted. Brilliant. Thank you, Chris.
Yes. Oh, wonderful. I really resonate very much with what Jonathan said. I don't remember in my education actually being given much information about any other faiths. I think in my senior school, or it could have been upper primary, I think there was one mention of Islam. I think that was a teacher that popped in because the teacher that was supposed to be there wasn't there, and she just decided to abandon whatever lesson was going to take place and just laid this out, and that was it. Like Jonathan, and I think this is something that is actually pertinent to all human beings, and particularly in our youth, we ask a lot of questions, the big questions. I think we should be asking them throughout our life, but particularly our start of our search of meaning for life begins, when we get to 12, 13, 14. So I was asking those questions. Who am I? What am I doing here? And one very important thing that came to my mind is, why am I saved and other people are not? Even if they live a better life than me, that just didn't seem fair. And, I truly believe that there is a God, a being, something greater than humanity. And I thought that if he made this wonderful world and put us on, that there has to be fairness, there has to be justice. And then I came across teachings of Baha'i faith, the youngest of the world's major religions, and the answer came then that, well, there's only one humanity. We're all members of one human race, one human family, and so therefore, just like there's only one sun for the whole of our planet, that in reality there is one God, or however you want to see that, something greater than us, and there's only in reality one religion. It's like a river that's flowing through humanity, and at one point in the river it's a stream, and at another it's a waterfall, and in one place it goes through a city, and another it goes through a village, and this is how it's gone all the way through. And the main teaching that underpins the foundation of all these faiths is treat others as you want to be treated yourself. And that then came into that. What else became very important to me was, as a child, I was extremely frightened about war and being in war. Never mentioned it to anybody. And so this understanding that actually we can bring about peace, because it needs collaboration, it needs cooperation, it needs friendship, it needs tolerance, and above all, it needs unity. That's something we can all work with. We can work towards.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's really lovely hearing the themes through what you've been discussing, coming through this idea of big questions like Jonathan had in his story, but also how you've talked about other people's stories and their understanding and developing understanding between kind of people of different worldviews and tolerance, which is just what we want from good RE, isn't it, as well? So thank you so much. Amy.
Thank you. And yeah, thanks for inviting me along to this as well. I think, again, picking up on some themes that hearing from Chris and Jonathan as well, I think I can hear in my own story too. So yeah, I guess for me, over the years, I've begun to understand the importance of my faith more as I've got older, in the way, in the importance in terms of how I live my life. I've also come to a realization over the years, over the last 10, 15 years, more particularly actually, that although my faith was something that I celebrated in my family context and within the Sikh community, because I follow the Sikh faith, but within the Sikh community that I belong to, it wasn't something that was acknowledged or talked about or asked about in other parts of my life. So whether that was with friends, and that's not just friends at school, but this is, as I got older, I went to university and have children of my own now as well. But also, when I was at school, as a student myself, it wasn't something that was openly acknowledged or talked about. There weren't those spaces to have those conversations, to share my own faith and belief. And even at work, I've worked in education settings where RE's been taught for over 20 years, and in particular within charities as well over the past 20 years, so charities are, very often values-driven sector. Actually, my faith and belief never came into that. It was never acknowledged or just talked about, or spaces weren't created to be able to talk about that part of my identity. And so there wasn't like one aha moment for me, I guess. It was just a gradual realization I wanted to be part of a change where those spaces were created for faith and belief to be understood, to be celebrated, for it to be acknowledged as a really crucial and important part of people's identities, and especially for children to be able to share this really important part of their identities as well. And just a very sort of quick insight. So when I was growing up, I felt that I lived two very separate lives. So there was the kind of the life of me in school, in the wider world, outside of the home, which was trying to fit in, to be like the other children at school, with the very British culture that I lived in. There weren't representations of diverse faiths and beliefs or people of colour even on TV, for example, or in the media and things. So I wanted to fit in with what I saw as the majority culture around me. And then there was a very separate life at home where we followed in the home cultural practices and food and music and everything that came from my Indian heritage, but also from my Sikh faith and the Sikh traditions that we followed at home as well. So I went to Sunday school at the Gurdwara. Every Sunday I learned to read and write in Gurmukhi, and went to pray at the Gurdwara as well. But all of that was very separate, and I didn't allow the two to kind of cross over. And in fact, I because there weren't spaces for any of that crossover, I kind of got the underlying message that, subconsciously, that they shouldn't cross over and I shouldn't be sharing. So I wasn't proactive either. So the effects of this on me personally, as I was growing up, was that I never quite felt whole. That's the only way I can kind of describe it. So I guess that's the other thing that really, when the opportunity came up to work with the Faith and Belief Forum, and to actually look at faith and belief identities and values and journeys and experiences of people and really get to understand that, it was like this was my moment, to actually bring this kind of sense of myself, and actually a real to be driven, I guess, to kind of make that change. And I guess so for me, on reflecting on that journey, actually I feel that it's really important for a person's sense of self, for mental health and well-being, to actually be able to bring your whole selves to any space and place that you're in. But especially, I think Jonathan mentioned it as well, that especially for children, I feel like actually having those spaces and places and encouraging that, acknowledgement, but also celebration of all parts of the children's identities is really, really important. So that's why I became really passionate about working within the interfaith field, and also encouraging curiosity about others. I learned through my own journey that I became curious about how other people live their faith and belief, and what drives people as well. And I feel that actually schools, as we're going to explore later on, schools are spaces that you can foster all of those kind of all that curiosity to happen in a very sort of safe space.
Yeah, thank you. It's fascinating what you're saying about this kind of freedom to share who you are as a person. I think I've been doing some work on freedom of religion or belief, and that being a human right, and how we can support children in schools with that. And I think everything you said, it's that lived experience of sharing that. So thank you so much.
Following on from Katie's question, I was just wondering why you think that interfaith dialogue and cooperation is so important in today's society, and if you could say something about this in schools, primary and secondary schools, and perhaps something about the work that you do as well, that would be really wonderful. So I'm going to go to Chris first and ask you.
Yes. I do feel that children need to be appropriately informed about what's going on in the world, about who's in the world and why this is happening and what's happening, because we all need to be looking at the causes of these things, and then we also need to be obviously looking at the solutions to these things. Otherwise we just go on and on and on and on and on, piling misery on each other, which is not how the world is supposed to be. I also think there's an awful lot of misinformation that's going around. Some of it is very disturbing and worries people greatly. But there's a lot of things that I think that education could, delve into, like the thinking that religion is the cause of all wars. The thinking that man is naturally aggressive and that we can't change human nature. Because if we can't change human nature, then give up now. There's no point in trying, really, is there? The most changeable thing, I think, in nature is human nature. And we've got lots of powerful stories in all the faiths, and of people who started out as one thing and then they became courageous and brave and kind and loving through different circumstances. So I think that peace and harmony are essential in understanding what's going on, and I think also particularly understanding the great role that all these major faiths have played in the development of individual human beings and of societies. Every time you see a great development, a great growth in societies, you will see that it's aligned with the progress of a particular faith, of wherever it is in the world. And I just want to leave you with a kind of a little story that kind of illustrates the importance of unity, because I know teachers love illustrations and stories, and I'm sure you all know it. The story of the wealthy farmer who has so many sons, and they are quarrelling about who is going to have the land after he's gone, and who's the best, and how to divide it and that. And so he gives to each of his sons, he gives them a stick, and he tells them to break it. And obviously that's quite an easy thing to do. Then he gives them a bundle of sticks, and he then tells them, now break this. And they can't. And he said, yes, he said, you are greater together than you are individually. And I think this is so important for unity on this planet, for us to understand we are greater together than we are as individuals.
That's a wonderful reflection. Thank you so much. And stories are so important. I hadn't actually heard that one, Chris. So thank you for that. Some really profound reflections there about human nature, and I think it really resonates with some of the purposes for RE in the classroom and education in general as well, to kind of foster this understanding of the innate goodness in human beings, and challenge some of the the nasty rhetoric that we find so often around us these days. Thank you so much. Amy, how about you? What about your reflection?
Yeah, thank you. And just, yeah, I mean, just connecting to Chris's story there, actually, and what you were saying there, Angela, as well. I think, the most crucial part of interfaith and dialogue and, coming together and understanding each other is exactly that, isn't it? It's actually I feel it's the best way to challenge the rhetoric that we're hearing, the divisive messages that are sent through media, through politics, we're surrounded by it, and I really feel for children, and young people growing up in today's world, because I didn't have social media when I was growing up. There were limits to what I was hearing and seeing, whereas I think in today's world, children and young people are exposed to so much, so much on a daily basis. That actually schools are the best places or best placed to help counter and challenge some of this misinformation that Chris was talking about as well. I guess connecting with interfaith dialogue and cooperation in particular, actually these can be great moments for learning. So it's firstly about bringing that learning to life. So dialogue and understanding interfaith, as opposed to sort of simply reading things from a textbook. It's about bringing that learning to life, really, isn't it? It's a way that to kind of combining the storytelling. So we love hearing stories, even as adults, I'm sure we all love hearing stories. But through those stories, we're learning about people's lived experiences. We're coming to a point where we can understand the diversity of faith and belief journeys. And that's, within faiths and across faiths and beliefs as well. It's a way of making children and young people aware that there isn't one story that fits all or fits a group. It's really coming to the point of getting to that level of understanding, and it's a practical way of gaining experience of dialogue and asking questions as well. So it's the skills that come through that interfaith dialogue, through that the kind of the cooperation that has to take place as part of dialogue. And at the Faith and Belief Forum, we talk about a method of actually dialogue as a method of turning challenging or difficult moments that can be challenging to one's own sense of self or to one's beliefs, actually turning them into learning opportunities. So you're shifting those mindsets into kind of being more of a learning mindset and seeing opportunities for actually growth and better understanding that can come through that dialogue and cooperation. And it's really being an interactive way of learning, asking questions, learning how to ask questions around sensitive issues. And I think all of that can be done within primary and secondary schools at all ages, where schools can, especially teachers, can help create safe, brave and shared spaces for those conversations and that kind of learning to happen. And actually around challenging the bias and prejudice and being able to critically analyse the world and the big questions and the events around them, but through that lens of empathy and understanding. I don't feel there's a better way of doing it, actually, other than actually coming together and having that dialogue within the classroom, whether it's, that you have people of different faiths coming in, or people of, the same faith, but actually, again, understanding that diversity within faiths as well. And just learning that everyone comes from a different worldview, and that we're living in a world where we can all think and believe differently, but we can still get on. And challenging that, because that's not the message that we necessarily hear in the world around us, but actually creating those spaces where that understanding can come, that we don't all have to agree, but we can also live together.
That's just such profound thinking there. And I think that this idea of having brave discussions is really important, because it's so essential, isn't it, to talk about those things in the classroom and in our communities as well, that are not necessarily comfortable and sometimes painful to address in that sort of safe and shared space. So I think that's really, really crucial to children and young people. So thank you for those thoughts, Amy. Jonathan,
Thank you.
over to you.
Yeah, two very interesting responses. Yeah, I'm maybe it comes to mind of the late and dearly missed Jonathan Sachs, who's been a great inspiration in so many ways, and particularly for our work in Interfaith at the Centre in Plymouth. He's been a great guide, and how we miss his wisdom today. And one of the things he said, he wasn't actually, although he said a lot about interfaith and the way he lived his life transcended all sorts of borders, and people of all faiths, no faiths, listened to him and were inspired by him. And I think there's a key message in that. But he himself saw there were limitations to interfaith dialogue. And one of the things that came out of it for him was that it creates friendship. And I think, what we're saying is that we need to build bridges, and the interfaith dialogue, cooperation between faiths, actually builds bridges, and that's what is sorely needed everywhere we look. But that also highlights something which probably for me is key. That can't happen without skilled teachers. It's not just about RE that will do this. It's not just about interfaith dialogue will do this. You've got to have people who are skilled, who know what they're doing, who understand a range of different faiths and what a spiritual dimension actually means, and who have the skills, almost what we're saying, in the way of the spiritual teachers themselves. The Buddha, in the Buddhist, the idea of skillful means, and the parables and stories that we're so enamored with and so inspired by, that all religious teachers taught, the great stories of the gurus in the Sikh tradition, so forth. And so these, I think it just points to me about the limitations of interfaith dialogue and RE even itself, unless we have the skills. So I think it's about really encouraging and improving. Then we're back to the old chestnut of teacher training and so forth. Maybe more of that later. But and I think that's where it is both the strength and the weakness, because where you have teachers who do have those skills, insights, then they, through their teaching, and I think this is the key for me of interfaith dialogue and cooperation, that you're actually helping to promote diversity, but not just as an end in itself. Through diversity, you also discover and realize a deeper unity, which we might want to point to, that all faiths point to. So there is that kind of progress from diversity to unity. And how do we get there? Often, and probably I would say centrally, through wisdom, through insight, through the great religious traditions, the great wisdom traditions of faith, of no faith, of humanist traditions, where there is that kind of understanding of the human condition and how to deeply come to terms with the issues, the problems, and that is inextricably bound up with discovering, with uncovering, with realizing our ultimate nature. So it's also for children laying before them actually an invitation to see that all religions are talking about what we might call a higher purpose, or a higher sense of, or the best possibility of who we can be. And whether all traditions will speak about that in a different way. And I think that transcends all the relative, all the conventional identities that we might get all very excited and steamed up about. But actually, we have an identity that transcends all of that. And all traditions speak of that, and all traditions speak about it in a different way. Now, how do we expect teachers on how many hours of training in B.Ed primary do you get? I mean, it's asking a lot, isn't it? But that is so important.
Yeah, I think that's so insightful, actually, and just thinking about those kind of high ideals and aims for what we can do in education, but then also your emphasis on the practicalities, the groundedness of and it's something that we campaign for really really hard at NATRE, to have skilled teachers in front of pupils, because if you're going to have these brave and sometimes difficult discussions, and you're going to foster this understanding in the classroom, you need the teachers who've got the knowledge and skills to be able to do that. So yeah, exactly. That's such an interesting and insightful response. So thank you so much. So I'm going to hand over to Katie for the next question.
I'm sorry for disappearing on you. I'm battling a bit of a cold at the moment and I had a bit of a coughing fit. So Angela seamlessly took over from me. But I've been listening to everything you've said, and it's just fascinating. And I think we started to touch on some of what I'm going to ask the next questions about now. But it would be great if we can expand on some of those thoughts that we've perhaps already shared. So I was wondering, how do you all think that religious education in schools contributes to fostering respect, understanding and tolerance amongst young people from different faith and belief backgrounds? So I don't know if anybody wanted to kick off that discussion now.
Yes, I don't mind.
Thank you, Grace.
Well, I feel today, unlike the past, many children won't actually stay in their area, and most children won't marry the girl or boy next door, as used to be done. They're going to be far-flung, aren't they? And they're going to meet people from vast areas of the land that we never had the opportunities to do. So as teachers, as educators, we need to think about not where we are today with the children, but also we have to see into their futures, and so that we give them the skills for their futures. And of course, education is the greatest means of dispelling darkness and bringing knowledge, light. And I feel that we have two great channels of education that have been given us, and one is science, the arts and sciences, and the other is religion. And I see them quite a little bit like this. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see them as the two wings of one bird. And the bird needs two wings in order to be able to fly. And at the moment, the science wing is kind of like a little bit larger than the wing of religion. But they need to be equal. We need to find out the way, how do we integrate those, and how does religion inform science, and how does science inform religion? And also, RE in schools is perhaps one of the only lessons where children can actually see teachers ask the big questions that they don't know the answers to, and it's okay for them to explore these together. I think one other thing I also feel is that there needs to be an emphasis not just on sort of giving information, but religion is about actually living, being and doing. And so I think it's very, very important that we also give children opportunities for acts of service to others, because when you serve others, you learn the joy of serving. You learn, you come closer to people, and I think that is, it's not just sitting down listening and I tick that off, I've done this, and I'm doing this towards a qualification, and that. No, the whole point of faith is that you be it, you do it.
Yeah, I think Nikki McGee, who's one of our executive, and I often talk about the fact that children are fascinated by people, and RE gives them that opportunity to ask those big questions about lived experience and how people live. And by doing that, they're already starting on that journey of understanding, aren't they? By kind of finding out about what other people do, but also how they live and what they believe in. And I think that kind of focus on people is really important as well. So thank you. So Amy or Jonathan, I don't know which of you would like to step in next. Thanks.
Yeah, just connecting with what we've just heard from Chris as well, and your own reflections. I mean, yeah, I think it's crucial. RE as a subject is crucial, actually, and it's quite sad to see how it's not put forward as an important subject. It's not recognised, because it is the opportunity to ask those big questions, and for children to be, and young people to be curious. It's a great starting point, I think, for that exploration to happen. I do wish it was taught in a much broader way and it being more about the development of these skills and the exploration rather than the transfer of substantive knowledge as it can be taught in some schools. I think it is taught very well in lots and lots of schools, but I wish that was kind of a wider practice. It is that place to explore those big questions and for students to think about their own values and beliefs, I think is a great starting point as well. So at the Faith and Belief Forum, when we talk about, about actually sort of religious education, understanding, respect, tolerance, it's very much of thinking, well, actually, starting from the I, what do I believe? What do I think? And then moving on to the you and thinking about others, what might others think and believe, and that's where there's the exploration of other faiths, beliefs, lived experiences. And then thinking about the we, and actually the kind of the collective, the wider context as well, that very often these stories are lived within. And I think that's a really useful journey or pathway to help develop thinking about values, beliefs, faiths. But then doing that in that way, I think, can lead to that greater empathy, which then leads to greater respect. It leads to greater, more tolerance and actually better understanding as well. And I think, in order to understand others, you have to be able to understand yourself, of course, first. But I think that the kind of the bigger the we bit as well is super, super important in terms of understanding the context and exploring that, and for students to have the time and the opportunity to explore that through some of the big questions. But again, going back to the point around Jonathan's point around sort of teachers as well, I feel for it to be done well, teachers do need to be supported to understand how to create those safe, brave, shared spaces for that dialogue to happen, especially to be able to safely explore some of those big questions, because they can be quite challenging, within the classroom with their peers, but also thinking about other views that might be outside of the classroom. And other experiences and other faiths and traditions that that children very often because they're in their bubbles, they won't have encountered before, and actually exploring some of those experiences of others in a positive way, for it to be a positive encounter, whether that's through storytelling as an encounter, whether it's through the dialogue and the big questions, for example. But I think actually RE, for it to be truly enriching, it needs to go beyond the textbook for it to really, really happen. But yeah, I think it's just crucially important to children, young people's development, and their sense of self within the world around them.
Thank you. That's such a good description. And I think that idea of thinking about themselves and then about others, but also about that diversity within a religion or a belief as well, that not everybody thinks or does the same, and their lived experience might be different. So one of the things that at my school we've tried to do is to have panels of visitors that are all from the same worldview, but practice in different way, and their lived experience is different, so that children can see that diversity. And I think that kind of dialogue where they can see their teacher asking those questions as well is really important to kind of show that actually that learning journey never stops, and that understanding of people and that kind of interaction with people never stops as well. I have a friend that came over from the USA, and she spent 3 weeks in my classroom, and she watched some RE a few years ago when I was working at another school, and she said, we just need this subject in the USA. She's like, it just brings so much to young people, And I think we've got like you've just described, we've got a real treasure in RE, and we just need to value it more, I think, and schools and the government need to value it more and for what it offers our young people. So thank you. Jonathan.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a tricky one, isn't it? It's I suppose it relates to some comments I made earlier about teachers and the skills and in a way, the teacher is the person who models a way of life at the front of the classroom or wherever. And I think that's really important, that teachers are able to or realize that all eyes are on them, and how they act, how they talk, how they interact with their children is crucial. It's all conveying learning to those children. So that's just reiterating, I think, as we're all agreed, aren't we? You know, the vital role of the teacher here. But in Plymouth, we worked with Solly Irving, a Holocaust survivor for many years. He used to come down from London until his death, sadly, in 2017. And he spoke to over 30,000 students in Plymouth schools during that period of 15, 16 years. He would always end his talks with the same phrase, an exhortation, a warning, but also a plea, really. And he would say, try to create a better world than the one I had to endure. And of course, the really powerful message of that, but then of course to explore, well, how do we do that? And often, you know, we look around, and as all of us have noted, it's a broken world, and yet it's only really, isn't it, is it only through, well, literature does it, art can do it. There are all sorts of subjects which can also have a sense of unity, of pointing to something beyond our differences, a sense of who we ultimately are. And I think obviously religion, Casey's talking about, you know, this jewel of religious education. Within that, there is that jewel of, we are acknowledging, particularly, although spiritual, moral, social, cultural is absolutely key to the school and Ofsted inspections, but we have that spiritual dimension, don't we, which is the dimension that takes all of us beyond just the differences, beyond the black, the white, the gay, the straight, whatever it happens to be. The spiritual transcends it all. And I think that is what we have to communicate and provide opportunities more. And again, it comes back to, well, how do you do that? But teachers, and particularly in RE, are extremely skilled at being able to do that. You cannot give someone a spiritual experience, but we can create the opportunities for it. And I was reminded, again, in terms of the Holocaust and some of the work that's been done since that in education, of trying to create, there was a report done in 2009, and the Children's Society, Children's Values in a Competitive Age, and they were quoting some of the survivors of that particular horror, and one in particular, and the work about how do we create that sense of who we really are. How can we give children, create an opportunity for children to experience something that transcends relative existence, that transcends differences and identity. And one is, you know, we have a sense of belonging to something greater than greater than ourselves, just as Chris's example, that in a group, even beyond that, the fact that we have a connection to something greater. Art does that, music does that, dance does that, fiction does that. In so many different ways, children have the opportunity to experience something which transcends, a sense of the transcendent. And that, I think, is something in RE, if we're not careful, we start to lose, actually, because of other important impulses and knowledge and understanding, all of which are very important. But I think we have to acknowledge, just as in religion, all those things are pointers. All those stories, all those parables, all those teachings are pointers to an experience that is transcendent, but actually is deeply what we might call human. That it's part of being human. And I think those are the experiences, if we are able to, we need to try and, through whatever teaching whatever tradition, to actually be able to expose children to those teachings, those stories, those experiences, which give a sense of that. Again, it requires enormous skill, but to give children that opportunity, I think, is really the way in which we begin to build, you know, that sense of respect and understanding. Of course, the fallback, or what can also drive that, is British values. Not terribly popular with a lot of teachers ever since it came out, for all sorts of reasons. But whether we call it British values, human values, universal values, doesn't matter. The fact there's something that brings us together, it'll do. British values will do. And that sense of coming together through diversity, but we're all part of something beyond ourselves, is crucial.
Thank you. I think it's that space, isn't it, of children to ask those big questions of what makes me me and what makes you you, and that kind of that idea of, by finding out about people and their lived experience, we can live well together. We don't have to do the same or think the same, but we can understand each other and live well as a community together. And I think that's really important. So thank you, all three of you, for your reflections on that question. I'm going to pass back to Angela now, who's going to ask our next question.
Thank you so much. So my question is, have you encountered any challenges in promoting interfaith dialogue in schools or educational settings? So I'm going to go to Amy first and ask you about your work.
Thank you. So I think it connects with some of what we've already heard in terms of teachers, and actually the challenge that we've encountered is that teachers have had to withdraw from a workshop, for example, because of what's happening in the wider world. You know, especially in the last year, the last 12 months have been very turbulent, I think, for you know, lots of very big reasons. And there's been that fear of opening up the space for interfaith dialogue, because there's, I guess, yeah, the fear of actually allowing spaces where children, young people can explore some of the kind of the wider issues that are going on in the world. And if we're encouraging, you know, open and honest questions, of course, there are going to be some challenging questions that are going to arise. And I guess for me, I feel that, you know, yeah, that's definitely been the biggest challenge, but I feel that actually to support, in order to be able to support teachers to be able to continue with interfaith dialogue, we need better policies and support from government, of course, because I think a lot of the messaging that's coming down from government to teachers, you know, it is basically telling them they won't be supported if there's a certain conversation that happens within a classroom, you know, and again, for senior leaders, I think within schools and local authorities as well, to also be more supportive of teachers, support them to develop the skills to be able to manage some of those difficult conversations, but also, you know, the guidance, it's, you know, understanding of the value that comes from opening up space for that dialogue. I think, you know, all of this would help so that teachers don't have that fear. Yeah, it's been something that we've been kind of grappling with, as I say, for a while, but certainly over the last year. And we've been talking to our teachers that we work with to kind of look at ways of supporting. But yeah, it's I think it has to be part of a bigger collective effort from the powers that be, as well as the people on the ground.
That's so interesting. And do you think the landscape has changed recently for your work?
Yes, I mean, I've been working at the Faith and Belief Forum for 4 years now, and it's definitely changed quite significantly in the last 12 months, I would say. Yes, yes, from you know, October the 7th onwards, and then of course in the summer with the riots and the violence in the summer as well. I think children, young people, even at primary age, are coming into school, from what we're hearing through our teachers, you know, wanting to talk about some of these bigger things and thinking about, well, what does it mean for me, you know, for my own identity? And of course, they're hearing, again, even more divisive sort of rhetoric in the world around them. And I guess, you know, there's a real skill in being able to critically analyze what's happening, but I think through an empathetic lens is something that's really missing. It's that empathy.
Yeah,
and actually allowing spaces, and this is why I feel that schools are places where, if it can be done right, are great spaces for children and young people to develop those skills, because I do feel that they need to, the critical analysis and the empathy needs to go hand in hand to create that understanding. But from the teachers that I've spoken to, they don't feel supported. They don't feel that, they don't feel they've got the skills as well. Although actually, and again, this is, Jonathan mentioned the teacher training. How can you teach this when it's just, it can take some of that experience and expertise, and the actual doing of it. But if you're not going to be supported by the powers that be, if you do open up spaces to have that, and actually for your own teacher journey as well, in terms of learning and developing those skills, it's easier to shut it down than open up those spaces to talk about these things.
That's really a really interesting response, a really interesting perspective. Thank you so much for that, Amy. Jonathan, how about challenges in your areas of work in school?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that. Again, I don't want to keep underlining the challenges, the limitations I think that the teachers face in all that has just been said by Amy, really, that it's extremely difficult and teachers are under huge pressure and doing an incredible job. And I think that, so it might be, I mean, I at one point felt very strongly some years back through SACRE that we could offer much more after school professional training ongoing and so forth. I think that really is probably a more realistic way, because I think in a way this issue that we're looking at, and for me, coming back to teacher training, only really arises when you recognize it's an issue. And I think you don't want to spend time persuading people it's an issue necessarily on their initial teacher training. But I think once teachers see there's a real need here through their own teaching, it becomes a very real sense of wanting to do something about it. I think you can work with people much more effectively over a shorter period of time who really want to be there, who really see the issues and want to increase maybe their awareness and skills in that area. So that's one thing. When we first started the centre in early 2000, although it had been an interfaith group before that for 2 or 3 years, and very quickly, within days, there was the Twin Towers catastrophe, which changed the world really forever. On the back of that, there was quite a lot of funding available, even for interfaith dialogue, even from national government, and for things like community cohesion. There were direct funding streams that we benefited by. When we set the centre up, Plymouth City Council were incredibly supportive and behind the establishing of a centre, which I would say every city, every area really needs one, or a hub that can act and model this kind of practice that we've been talking about, and can actually do the administrative work that makes it possible to bring people into schools and to create these dialogues, which ordinary teachers don't have the time to do. That funding is now not there. It's changed completely, and actually to apply for funding now for doing this kind of educational work, to be honest, I mean, I've completed so many applications over the last few years, and most of which have not even been acknowledged by some organizations. So finding money, finding funding to support this kind of interfaith work or faith awareness in schools is very, very difficult. And so that's a major challenge.
Yeah, funding is such an issue, isn't it? And I think if well, you alluded to this, if SACREs can, find some money and some support from various different sources, maybe in their own budgets and through funders like West Hill, for example, then that can help enormously as well. Thank you so much. So, Chris, how about you? You're in a slightly different context in Wales. What challenges have you faced?
Oh, well, challenges are good if we prepare to learn from them and develop. So that's one thing. But I don't know if you've ever been in a conversation with somebody and you know you're speaking the same language, but actually you think, am I speaking the same language? Because I don't seem to be understanding what they're saying, or I'm not hearing what they're saying, or they're not listening to me. Because I think some years ago, that's how it felt. And I think it was because there was such an emphasis on comparative religion. And it felt to me as though people wanted to find out, what was the differences in all of these things. And they almost it was like, they wanted to get people together. So there was a little bit of argy-bargy going on. I wanted to have the kind of conversations that we were having today, where we're finding the agreement that that we have, and we're also delving into what is the essence of faith, So, it's wonderful that people celebrate this holy day, that holy day, they wear this, they eat this, but that's not the essentials of this deep inner core of us that is very, very important. So that was how it felt really in the beginning, that we weren't really talking the same language. I've been in schools and I am a member of SACRE, and I think I noticed several just practical things actually that were challenging. One in particular is that if the children have not been prepared, particularly, some schools we've been in, this is what we've been studying over course of so many weeks, and in others we've had kids coming into the class saying, what are we doing here, miss, today? I've also had teachers who are not engaged. That's very, very difficult. You can imagine. Now, remember that not every visitor that comes into your school is going to be a scholar or a minister, and yet they're going to be expected to know everything, and a teacher might say to you, here's the class, carry on. I'm just going to sit in the corner and fiddle with my computer. And you think, are they testing me to see whether I call upon the divine power to assist me to get me through the next 40 minutes? Really, really appreciated when teachers welcome you at the door, or they've sent a pupil to welcome you at the door, when they tell you where the toilet is when you've had a long journey to the school, when they offer you a cup of tea, or they tell you beforehand where you can park in their extremely terrible parking area that they have around the school. These all set you up to go into and deliver whatever it is you've got to deliver with as calm, as serene as a swan,
They're really important practical considerations.
It is very practical.
Yeah.
And then finally, I think I would really like to know what SACRE's involvement is, because I think sometimes are the SACREs actually thinking about interfaith? And even the governors of the school, they can make a difference. So everybody's sort of like coming together, aren't they? And they're sort of making everything wholesome.
Yeah. That's so interesting, and really and truly, SACREs are an interfaith meeting. They're probably the only interfaith meeting that's required by law, I think. So yeah, so they really should be thinking about interfaith RE and interfaith collective worship as well. It's their remit. And I think some of them do an amazing job of that. And that there's different contexts for different SACREs across England and Wales, but there's some really interesting points there that you made, and so I really love your kind of practical focus too. So thank you very much for that, Chris. Katie, over to you for our last question. We're going to end on a high note.
Yeah, we are. We want to really focus on sort of celebrations within the work that you do, because Having chatted to lots of you and those of you talked to Angela as well, she's told me there are many celebrations to be had. So our final question, which is a bit of a two-parter, is which moments in your work with schools would you like to celebrate? And can you share anything that you have done that's had a really huge positive impact? I'm sure you all can. So I'm going to come to you first, Chris, if that's okay.
Oh, I thought it wasn't going to let me unmute there. Yeah, there are too many really to mention, but briefly, I think I've really enjoyed the variety of approaches that schools have offered us, you know, whether it's panels, a carousel approach into a classroom, exhibitions, you know, bringing some art in or music. That's been really, really joyful. As people of faith generally, we don't want to just talk, we want to do, we want to feel as though we've served others as we've been of use. And those moments when I've actually felt that I've connected with somebody in a one-to-one way, I'll give you two examples. I went to a school, to a primary school, to give a little talk, and the teacher afterwards said, could I prepare a little series of lessons about life after death, because there was a child who just lost a parent, I think it was. And they said, but we don't want to kind of just pinpoint it to that child. We want it to be so broad, so the whole school, the whole class is in on this. And I was able to do that. And I really thank the teacher for trusting me to do that. And I do hope that was very, very helpful. And then there was another occasion when I went into a school, and actually it was quite a challenging session. But afterwards, one of the girls came up to me, and she told me something very, very personal about a relationship she had. Her grandmother was her role model in life. We've been talking about, you know, role models, and how she obviously grieved her grandmother, and she felt connected to her grandmother who had passed on. And I don't think she would have shared that with anybody in a history lesson, a geography lesson, a maths lesson. There is something about our RE that enables these kind of little conversations that really, I've taken that to heart. I will remember that for many, many years to come. And I hope she will as well. And then one of the highlights for me was one of the panels I was on actually had two pupils from that year group on the panel. I thought they were extremely brave. Like, one was an atheist, I think, and one was a Christian. And I was absolutely astonished at how brave and bold they were, particularly the Christian, because, you know, there were certain things in his beliefs that would not have gone down well with his fellow pupils. His thoughts on capital punishment, you know, things like that. And yet he was given that place to speak, and the school listened. And I thought that was so such an illustration of what we're saying about, you know, this our faith, how deep it is, how much a part of it is, and how we need to have those moments where we can express it in a safe, comfortable environment, and learn that even if you disagree with somebody, that's okay, as long as you handle it in a respectful manner.
Thank you, Chris. I think what you've just described really well is how you going in and working with those teachers have created a really safe space for children to ask questions and to share their own kind of viewpoint, their own personal knowledge as well, which I think is a really important element of RE learning. So thank you so much for sharing those stories with us. Amy, can I come to you next, please?
Thanks for sharing that as well, Chris. And yeah, it's so lovely to hear these stories, because again, it just reminds you of the value of the work that you do and the impact that you have on, from the individual child all the way up to the classroom. So for me, I was going to combine the two questions, into the one answer. I've had the pleasure of working with one school in particular in East London for the 3+ years now, and just seeing the journey that the students have taken there has been fantastic, and it just shows, what can be done if a school is committed to supporting students on their faith and belief journeys and identities. And actually how a whole school approach can really, really help and work. But for me, it was great because it was a place where, so I was working with the chaplain in the school, and we've been working together on sort of like how to support students who wanted to explore faith and belief more, and not just within the RE curriculum. Actually, how can we explore this this part of our identities, across the whole school? And I was able to bring in my kind of passion for children's rights, because that's the background that I've come from, but also for interfaith into this one project that we've basically been able to evolve over the last 3 years. And it was to the point that now there's this established group of faith and belief advocates within the school. They cross a number of year groups as well, so they have representatives across the year groups. Children will apply every year. The advocates that started off have now become mentors as well. They in the first instance, we worked together to do some peer research on children's experiences within the school of faith, belief, and identity. And again, some really interesting findings came out from the research they did with their peers, in particular around the conversations that take place within school, but also actually how the outside world was impacting them in school. Especially when it came to their faith and belief identities. And their kind of, again, lived experiences of their faith. So it's just, I guess it's been amazing to see the journey that the school have taken, and how much the school have actually supported this initially quite small group, to now to the point they're talking about so not just within the RE curriculum, but actually how can faith and belief and religion come into other topics, other curriculum areas. They've been working with curriculum leads across other subjects to talk about the importance of actually this part of their identities, and actually bringing those into conversations, and how teachers can be supported to do that as well as changing spaces in the school as well. So creating prayer space or quiet space within the school, etc. So it's been a real proud moment, in terms of seeing the impact that it can, the work that I have through the Faith and Belief Forum, and the resources and the methodologies that we bring can have within a school, but also the passion and the drive that these young people have, and the importance of the support from the school to enable that to happen, and for the children really to be taking a lead in all of this, because they've come up with the ideas, they've led all of this.
That sounds absolutely amazing, Amy. Thank you. And I love that whole idea of a school approach, the children taking that kind of role of leadership as well, but being really carefully guided through by people who really understand what they're doing. And I love the kind of way that RE is now kind of leading the way for other subjects, in a sense, because you're saying about how that might go into other subjects and feed out from there. I don't know if you know, I'm sure you do, that Angela is the editor for RE today, and that sounds like a great article, Angela. It'd be really brilliant to share that a bit more kind of widely with our members.
I have been secretly noting down ideas for
yeah.
as we've gone along today. So you never know what you're going to volunteer yourself for if you talk to me.
Yeah, and I just think as well that would be really inspiring for lots of our teachers. I think there's a real kind of element of really best practice there that could be shared across the country. So thank you so much. Jonathan, I'm going to come to you next.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, two really good examples to rejoice in, aren't they? And I think it's great. Have a lot to rejoice in often in our work. So really good. I think for me, looking back now, I mean, the centre's nearly 25 years old. We started with an interfaith group, so it's entirely based on interfaith dialogue. So to see the work develop over this last 23 years, and now to the point where we do 300 visits a year to schools, and that's been on average, and bringing that kind of diversity, making it possible for local children to visit the synagogue, to the local churches, the Islamic Centre, Buddhist Centre, and so forth, is really a great joy, and I think a source of rejoicing. And a lot of people, I think, Sarah in the office and Arazu, Chair of Trustee, all these people of past and present who have made it all possible, who have also shared the sense of commitment to interfaith dialogue and where it can lead and what kind of results it can bring. Particularly, I've mentioned already the work we did with Solly Irving over 16 years in bringing a Holocaust survivor. That was all possible through the auspices of the centre, and that to me was really powerful. You could hear a pin drop. People would be talking to groups of 200 to 300 sometimes, year 10s and 11s, and you could hear a pin drop. And I feel we still get letters from students who heard him and said how that changed their life, how they're now studying this or they're going there as a result of hearing him. Just a wonderful little example too, just to close on. During Interfaith Week, I think it was last year or the year before, Radio Devon turned up, local radio, and they interviewed a child, a primary school child, a girl who's about 10 years of age, and we'd set up the day so they could visit the synagogue, the Islamic Centre, and I think to get a Hindu presentation as well. And she was interviewed by Radio Devon, and just totally unprompted, she didn't know. She said, "Well, have you enjoyed the day?" And she said, "Yes," she said, "it's opened up so many doors for me." And I thought, out of the mouths of a 10-year-old, this is just extraordinary. She felt something had opened up and that she'd had access all in one place. Now, Plymouth is possible to do that. You can walk, as I used to do when I used to teach, take pupils to the synagogue, take them to the Islamic Centre, take them to different churches. And that kind of real life experience, I think, is absolutely priceless, and that's really worth working for. And I'm so pleased that young student was able to see and reflect what it meant to her. Thanks.
I think what the centre does so well is not only open up those doors, but it also gives children links with those people as well. So they meet the real people in those communities and talk to them, and they kind of. It's really interesting, particularly with faith and belief speakers when they come into school, because you'll kind of get that lesson afterwards, so they'll talk about it and they'll look at responses to questions and things. And then weeks, months, years later, they'll go, "Do you remember when that person came in, they told us about such and such?" And it really does just help RE come alive for them as well. But I think it offers something really special to the speakers themselves as well.
I think sorry, Katie. No,
you carry on.
No, I'm just going to round it out because it brings back to what I said right at the beginning, because it was meeting people from a variety of different religious traditions and the way they lived and their sense of, who they were, their sense of being, of compassion, of kindness, of wisdom, that really inspired me and influenced me. And I think if we can create those opportunities for children through exactly what you've just said, I think, wow, great. Wonderful.
Yeah, and it also really helps teachers. I have a colleague that I used to work with in a previous job, and she said, when she taught RE every week, she would get to that point, she'd be like, "What if they ask me something I don't know?" And she said, so what she did was she set up Ask the Expert as a box, so that they would have a speaker from the centre come in every term, and then she'd just get the children to drop questions into this box, and then say to the speaker, you might not be able to answer all of these, but here are some of the ones, could you go through them? And it was really powerful because the children got that idea that, you know, as teachers, we don't know everything. And I think that's really important. We don't need to pretend to be the expert, but also those people who have that lived experience and that worldview don't always know the answer either.
No, and we can learn from each other, can't we? And that's really good. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
I'd like to thank all of you for coming along today and having this chat. It's been fascinating to hear from each of you with your different lived experiences of interfaith work, and all the amazing expertise that you offer the people in your communities and beyond. Thank you as well from the teaching community for all that you do, because without this work that you do, we can do the work that we do. So thank you for everything that you are doing behind the scenes to give children and teachers access to faith and belief speakers and these experiences of looking around places and finding out about their communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Angela.
And I just hope that we've given teachers that confidence, you know, to go out and do something. And it will increase every year by year, the number of interfaith activities that are going on.
Definitely. Thank you.
So.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Thank you.